Hello. So, if you live in Alberta, this textbook is going to be so familiar to you. This is the grade 11 math textbook. And I know that the exam season is around the corner and it's going to be stressful for you, for your families. And I'm just going to start teaching you summaries, hints, important points of this textbook. And I'm going to start with the reciprocal function. So, follow along and bear with me. Okay, so first thing first. What are reciprocal functions? Reciprocal basically means 1 over something. 1 over something is a fraction, right? So whatever that goes at the bottom makes a reciprocal. Reciprocal can be reciprocal of a function, can be reciprocal of a number. Like for example, if I give you number 2, reciprocal of 2 is 1 over 2, okay? So you basically just put 1 over everything that you have. When it comes to functions, those functions is just they can be marked as y equals to something or f of x equals to something, okay? And that something can be x minus 3, x plus 5, x squared, anything that you've learned so far. So you start with the original function. You start with the actual function that your teacher gives you. And the second thing that you do with the original function is that you find the points where the graph crosses the x-axis. What are those points called? You should know this, x-intercept. So look at the actual graph, look at the actual function, then find the zeros of that function or the x-intercept, okay? Come to the next part. Okay, so in this unit, you're gonna hear some new terms like vertical asymptotes. We didn't have that in grade 10 and before that. This is a new thing. What's vertical asymptote? Vertical asymptote basically means 2 vertical lines where my function never crosses them. Why? Because those points don't exist. Like, imagine you have a reciprocal. You have 1 over x. Okay, 1 over x. Can x get the value of 0? Can your x be equal to 0? No, never, because we cannot divide a number by 0. We know this. This is like grade 5, grade 6 math. We know that if you divide a number by 0, it doesn't exist. It's the same concept when it comes to reciprocal functions. If 1 over f of x doesn't exist, that's going to be the vertical asymptote, which basically means your graph either grows or decreases to those lines but never crosses them out. Why? Because it doesn't exist. Okay, so for finding out your vertical asymptote, you have to find f of x equals to 0, or basically those x-intercepts. So when you graph your actual function, your original function, those points where your graph crosses the x-axis, here and here, for example, imagine this is x-axis, it crosses this point and this point. Just put 2 vertical lines there and tell yourself that my inverse or my reciprocal function is not gonna go over these 2 lines, okay? Draw dashed vertical lines on that. Why? Because this is how we show vertical asymptotes in math, okay? Come to the next part. Okay, the third step is to find the invariant lines. Do you know what invariant line means? Invariant lines mean that your original function and your reciprocal function are equal. Equal to what? Y equals to 1 and y equals to negative 1. Why? Because 1 over 1 is 1 and 1 over negative 1 is negative 1. So these two doesn't change between your original function and your reciprocal function. You have to draw horizontal dashed lines and at those 2 points, those 2 horizontal lines, to show that these are your invariant lines, okay? Next part. Okay, the fourth step is to plot the key points. What are the key points? Key points are basically the invariant points. I told you about the invariant lines. So where those 2 lines crosses your actual function, your actual graph, you have to mark them with small circles to show those points. Those are important because it's gonna help you when you want to draw the reciprocal function itself. Next. Okay, the fifth step is basically just to draw or graph your reciprocal function using the reciprocal rule. What does that mean? That means if your f of x, your original function, is greater than 1, your reciprocal function will still be positive, but it's going to be less than 1. Why? Because 1 divided by a number greater than 1 is going to be a number less than 1. So so when it's positive but greater than 1, the reciprocal would be still positive but smaller than 1. When your f of x, when your actual original function is between 0 and 1, the reciprocal will be positive and greater than 1. When your original function is less than -1, the reciprocal function will be negative because the y's, the f of x, are negative, but 1 divided by a negative number will be negative but small, but a little bit greater than -1 and closer to 0. And when your f of x is between -1 and 0, reciprocal function will be smaller than -1. Take a screenshot of this and review this rule because it's really important. So we talked about the vertical asymptote, okay? This one is the horizontal asymptote. What does that mean? It means when you have 1 over something, that fraction is never going to be 0. Why? Because we have 1 on top, okay? So basically, your reciprocal function can never be equal to 0 because we have 1 at the numerator and not x, so that x can be 0, for example. No, since it's only 1, it never can be 0. Remember this, never can be 0. So y equals to 0 is your horizontal asymptote. You have to draw a dashed line on that as well, and never cross that x-axis, okay? Don't forget that. Next part. Okay, why those invariant lines were important? Because that's kind of like a guideline, okay? When you have the invariant point, you can choose a point before that invariant or a point after that invariant point of invariancy, basically, just to check if you got the curve of your reciprocal function correct. Like, for example, if your invariant point is at 1 and 1, choose a point that has an x bigger than 1 and 1x less than 1, and see if you got those values correctly, if it has to go up closer to the vertical asymptote or it has to go down closer to the horizontal asymptote. With those invariants, point of invariancy, you can basically check your work to see if you got your reciprocal function correctly. Okay, congratulations. It finally finished. You can sketch your reciprocal function now. Don't forget to practice more and more before your exam time, because this unit is the hardest, basically, in grade 11. It's the hardest unit, and so many students have problems with. And yeah, just follow along all these 8 steps until you're sure that you got your reciprocal function correctly. Does that make sense? Good luck.